and good afternoon. It's really nice to see so many of my colleagues, my students, and some guests from outside who are also my professional colleagues in the outside world. So welcome to you all, and this is a pleasure to be here. And this presentation here, why is Rashmi Singla standing here? Why is the chance for me to stand here? What is the story behind it? I'd like to start with this. The story behind this is my own background. You can almost guess that I come from another part of the world. And it was in 1980, I came from India to Denmark. So this East and West is part of my own life in some ways, both my professional life and my personal life. And this interest in the process of globalization, when we talk of globalization, it's become a buzzword. Everybody is talking of globalization and the globalized world. And I've also used it in the title here. What do we mean by globalization? For me, globalization is movement of people, knowledge, goods across borders. And here, as you heard from Director of Studies, hence, about my interest in transnationalism, which is more about people moving from one part of the world to another part. But here in this presentation, my focus is about movement of knowledge from one part of the world to another part of the world. And with this, I'll start. And as you've heard from my own background, I came here in 1980. I came with a degree in psychology, more precise in developmental psychology from Delhi University. And you can see in my name also, in my title, it's not very Danish to have all these titles, but here in this setup, they are mirroring my background. This MSc degree is from Delhi University. This Ken Suk degree is from Copenhagen University, also the PhD, and now I'm here in Roskilde University. But what is this relationship between East and West, and what am I going to do in the next 45 minutes? I'll introduce these orientations, Eastern and Western orientations, and then I'll be talking about the major aspects of psychology, what are the goals and contents of psychology. And I hope you are able to listen to me properly. Also, I hope I've switched it on. This, are you able to, is it on or off suddenly? Is it fine? Okay. And then I'll be talking more precisely about one of the Eastern practices, yoga and meditation. And then I'll switch over to this, another practice, mindfulness in Buddhism. And I'll go more into details, and I'll try to conclude and give you some perspectives. But why am I bringing this? Oh, East is East and West is West, and never the twain shall meet. And this is from 1887, Nobel Prize winner in 1907, Rudyard Kipling's poem, line from the poem. And I used it 15 years back. I wrote an article about this meeting between East and West, and I started with this line about East is East and West is West, and they can never meet. And already 15 years back, in a chronique in Information, an article in Psychological Association's magazine, I challenged this idea about East being East and West being West. And that time I thought maybe I was wrong in this, challenging this idea. They are so different. East is East and West is West. But somehow it seems that the differences, this can be challenged. And how this challenge is taking place and what is happening in the field of psychology in these practices, I'll be concentrating now. And to do this, I'll take the point of departure in my own subject, and that is psychology. And psychology, what is psychology? And there are many, many definitions, but I'll start with a very simple definition and understanding of psychology by saying psychology is the systematic and scientific study of the person in its surrounding, in relationships. But with this definition, can we say that psychology is just this Western mainstream psychology? No. We have this Eastern psychological knowledge, which is more than 3,000 years old. And this knowledge in the eastern part of the world about human being is based on the religious philosophical books, and it is very holistic and inclusive concept. So that is one way of seeing psychology in the eastern part of the world. And what is the Western scientific psychology? Now I'm talking of Western scientific psychology, and we have two fathers of Western psychology. And who are the fathers? One is from a neighboring country here. This is William Wundt, and the year 1860 is regarded as the sort of birth of, I hope you all can see it. Is it difficult to see the, should we remove this? I'm not using it anyway, if it is possible. Okay. So, yeah, you can see it. So, what I'm trying to bring out that Western scientific psychology. So one father is William Wundt from Germany, and another father is William James from United Nations. They are regarded as father of the modern scientific psychology, but we can't say that the modern psychology is not affected by the historical religious background. There is a lot of influence, and Steiner Quayle, professor from Aarhus, has written an excellent article about psychology's development, where he uses these metaphors of church, and then after church, factory, and market. And these metaphors for development of psychology bring out the fact that Western psychology is also influenced by the religious understanding, especially Protestant religious understanding. So with this very broad background, we will look more closely on the two sides, Eastern and Western orientations in psychology and what they focus on. And here we can see that the focus in Eastern, and maybe this is the other way around. Living in the West, we are so used to having West first, but I'm turning it upside down. I'm bringing the East first, and then, of course, the West is also coming. And sometimes it is good to turn things little upside down and see it from the other perspective. And the central focus is on indigenous aspects, and we have to see these understandings in the backdrop of cultural imperialism. Especially in my country of origin, in India, there were almost 300 years of British imperialism, which really affected the indigenous, original understanding of psychology, of being a human. And there is also the legacy of the colonial past. These understandings were really suppressed, and they were not given place. So we have to understand these psychologies in the broader background of colonization and suppressions. And these understandings, and the countries became more the recipients of the knowledge rather than exchange agents. The knowledge was suppressed in certain periods in these countries. And still, when I talk about Eastern understandings, I have my limitations also because of my own background and my own interests. Asia is much bigger than the three countries I'm naming here, but this is my way to have focus on India, systems of Hindu philosophy, Upanishads, yoga, Ayurvedic system, Buddhism. These are the sources of Eastern psychology for me. And further more, we can see in China, this Confucianism, Taoism, who are these subjects, these phenomena are forming basis for this psychological understanding. And in Japan, we can say there is Zen Buddhism. So it's not that I'm ignoring the other countries, but I'm focusing on these countries. So with this background, and of course, I must admit that when we compare such complex disciplines and such complex orientations, it entails simplification. So I'm maybe guilty of simplifying, but in order to compare, we have to simplify sometimes, and then we can bring the complexities in. And with this, we can see that if we are looking at Eastern psychology, then it's the different disciplines like religion, philosophy, and psychology, they are not separated, they are not sundered, they are more integrated. There is more integrated knowledge approach. And it is also believed that understanding of reality is not possible. If we just put knowledge into small watertight compartments, we cannot understand the complex reality. And in some ways, you can see in Roskilde University, to some extent, we are following this. Aren't we doing that? When we are able to study two different subjects, integrate knowledge from two different subjects. So with this, we come to the Western psychology, and this is, I'm talking about mainstream scientific psychology, in which there is a reductionist framework. There are dichotomies in the mainstream scientific psychology. And another issue which I also sort of will be a focus for me here will be the place of moral and ethic. Where is the issue of ethic and morality? Where is that issue in the scientific psychology? And Sven Brinkman, one of our colleagues, a professor from Aarhus, Aalborg University, isn't it correct? He's from Aalborg University. He was some time back, years back in Aarhus, but he's done his PhD about psychology as a moral science. And it was very inspiring to go through his PhD thesis, where he says that the modern psychology is a morally neutral science, that there is no place to be moral, because the modern psychology is sort of copying the natural science discipline, so it is morally neutral. But of course, we have a lot of focus on moral development. Kohlberg is one of the leading psychologists in the field of moral development, but on the whole, we can see that it is morally neutral. But these divisions, especially psychology in Roskilde University, is not following the mainstream scientific psychology ideas. And we have disciplines here, we have colleagues here who are following these subjects. These subdisciplines within psychology are questioning these divisions. And existential psychology we have some of our colleagues are doing social cultural psychology, social constructionism, critical psychology. So these are being challenged, but I'm still focusing on the very powerful mainstream psychology. APA, American Psychological Association, has 100,000 members. So it's bodies like that who are following mainstream scientific psychology, where there are these divisions. And with this, we come further, and we will look shortly what are the goals of Eastern psychology on one side and Western psychology on the other side. And of course, I'm again simplifying, and the Eastern orientation is very practical, and there is focus on both understanding, knowing, and being, and at the same time, emancipation of the self. And the interesting part is this man-society relation. It is man-society, and there is a lot of focus on harmony between different levels with the fellow beings, society, nature, and the cosmos. And in some ways, I can say that this rich phenomenology of consciousness, it is providing both for transactional learning and also transcendental, that you can go beyond these levels. So with this understanding, we come further, and this is again simplified, but the mainstream psychological orientation is about explaining, predicting, and controlling behavior. There is a lot of focus on predicting and controlling behavior, and also analyzing and gathering data. And Bacon, Francis Bacon, has brought this issue about knowledge being power, knowledge is power. So with this, in some ways, it is man and society. So in some ways, already in 1963, Velesh talked about, is psychology sanctioning selfishness? What about solidarity and harmony? So there are these issues, and they are with question mark. There are no simple answers. So with this, we come to the contents. What are these psychologies? If we can say that Eastern psychology on one side and the Western on the other side, what is what are the contents? And we can see that in the classic Asian systems, the objective and subjective stances, they are sort of being combined. And mind is, and there is a lot of focus on mind and consciousness, and they are. And the interesting part is about different levels of consciousness, not only the awake state, but different levels of consciousness are being focused at. And there are also these simple ideals, simplified ideals about harmony and social integration, about balance, functioning, and protection and care. So with this, now I come to the last part of this broad introduction to psychology. And you can see here, and somebody can say, what is she talking about? Why she's saying it's only wakeful states? There is a big research unit now, I think in Reese Hospital, who's working with sleep and importance of sleep, but this is a relatively new topic. So the main focus is on this wakeful states about the objects of consciousness, and objective stance is dominating. It's not the only one, but it is dominating. So what are the ideals of mental health? So in mainstream Western psychological understanding, the ideals of mental health become self-sufficiency and autonomy. I know it is questionable, it can be questioned, but as I told you before, I'm simplifying to have these comparisons. And so with this sort of background, now we will look at some practices. We have looked at Eastern perspective, psychological perspective, and the Western psychological perspective. And with this, now we will be looking more in depth in some of the practices from the East, which are being used in the West. And how many, now maybe I hope it's not so difficult to be awake in such a lecture. So many words, it's afternoon, and so most of you have been teaching or being taught or having meetings. So now I will ask you a question. How many of you sitting here and attending this presentation have attended yoga classes or some sort of Eastern practice, or some Tai Chi, or what, Kung Fu, or some sort of sports from, I don't know, isn't it Kung Fu is only for young boys? So how many? And that's very interesting. I can see from here, thank you very much. It's really nice to know that what I'm talking, it's not just some ideas in my head. My own colleagues, my own students here, more than half, I think it was a very fast sort of count. I think it was between 50 to 60% of you have had contact with these sort of practices. And what are the assumptions when you are taking part in such activities? There is some sort of assumption, there is some sort of understanding. What is it? And here, I'll bring some of the points, and this is, and it's, I must make it clear, I don't regard myself as an expert in any of these practices. I'm not a teacher of these of these practices, neither I'm nor I am expert in these. This is very vast, complex areas, but it was a challenge in 2011. There was this whole issue of Suk and Logos, one of the psychological magazines called Mindfulness and Meditation, and that was a challenge for me to sort of formulate my ideas. And in that, I wrote a little article about origins of mindfulness. That is another narrative about my being here. And in that, I really sort of try to analyze what is characteristic about the human nature, and in these, what are the basic assumptions. And I think I came to this point with help of a very strict and very knowledgeable blind referee. I came to these 3 points, and these points are about the monism between body and mind in Indian psychology. There's this connection between mind and body which really defines the personhood in Indian psychology, and also the centrality of consciousness. There's no idea about a black box or this. In some of the psychological theories, consciousness disappears, but this is very much there. And lastly, also, when we are talking of these practices, then these practices are a part of daily life. It's not something you just do it, it's just not a technique, but all this practice is part of daily life. So with this understanding, we can go more into details about yoga practice. And as I told you, you remember I talked about father of psychology. You remember Wundt from Germany, and who was there from USA? William James, yes. So similarly, although one can say, oh, there are so many types of yoga, and you all remember, some of you are from that generation, you remember Beatles and Maharshi, Rishi, transcendental meditation. So there are many types of yogas, but still we can say that if you read Indian scriptures, so Patanjali is regarded, Patanjali, one of the sages, about 3,000 years back, he is regarded as father of yoga. Not only yoga, he's also very well known for his writings about Ayurveda, which is the scientific and Indian understanding of long and healthy life, Ayurveda, and also grammar. He's also written books about grammar. So Patanjali's Sutra, they are regarded as, he's written these verses about coping with these challenges of having a healthy body and healthy mind. And so they constitute the basic principles of a meta psychology of the mind. And so yoga is not only, it's a system of knowledge as well as a system of training. And it's also a theory. There's the deep theory behind it is it's a system of theory about the bondage and suffering. It talks about the bondage and suffering of human beings and also a psychological method to escape this suffering. And you must have noticed I'm quoting Rao and Paranjpe. Rao, and this is one of the landmarks in Indian psychology. In 2008, one of the first comprehensive books of Handbook of Indian Psychology was published, and this is really well documented and well worked out book which I am quoting number of times. And what I want to show here is another how East and West is working. This is Gita Bix God. She has written a book. She's a see the globalization. Gita Bechkord is a Danish yoga teacher who's living in Canada, in Toronto. She's working there, and she's written this, The Gift of Consciousness, Patanjali Yoga Sutra. She's translated Patanjali's Yoga Sutra in English, not in Danish. But this shows, and I'm using some of the material from her book where she says, what is yoga? And yoga is some sort of union. Yoga is also aiming at one pointed concern, ekagrita. I've chosen to use some words. Can you see it? Now there's a lot of sun. I hope you are able to see the board because these words are not so familiar. These are Hindi and Sanskrit words I'm using, ekagrita. And yoga aims at ekagrita and also to reach high levels of consciousness. And also, the mind is chit. The word used for mind is chit, and how the mind functions and the functioning of mind becomes the focus in yoga. And what is interesting is yoga is really recognizing this psychophysiological interdependence. This Sukha Soma I was talking about, this is really recognized, and Patanjali has shown the eightfold path for preparation of yoga. So many of you have been to yoga classes or some of these activities, so you feel you are familiar with it. But what I will try to bring out that what you are learning here in many of the schools, yoga classes, not only in Denmark, in England, there are many, many yoga classes in many parts of the world. But the important part is yoga starts with yam and niyam. They are a set of prescriptions. In order to do yoga in proper way, you have to follow these do's and don'ts. There are some rules of morality. And they are ethics for society and individual. You should not be stealing, you should not be troubling other people, you should be compassionate. So these are the first rules of yoga. And then these asana comes, these different postures. That's the image. Also, maybe I'm myself responsible for supporting these stereotypes of yoga. You saw the first picture in my presentation. This is about these different asanas, different postures. So these bodily postures are just one part of this yoga exercise, yoga system. And then there's meditation, which is essence of yoga, and it continues. There are these different stages in this eightfold path. And so in this way, we can see that following this, yoga becomes a sort of union. This is union at different levels, union between body and mind, and union between mind and consciousness of person with a higher level of consciousness, which can result into sublime state called Kavilya. And you must be wondering, all this, we've been to these yoga classes, but we haven't got all this. And that is right also, because in many parts of the world, yoga is being applied as a secular application. where the religious aspects, the spiritual aspects are sort of subdued. So it becomes a secular application, and this is also part of it. But what are the consequences? Can there be some challenges, some problems? And of course, there can be, firstly, there are many types of yogas. Although the origin is from Patanjali, but there can be many interpretations, and there are many different stages of progression. And there can be conceptual confusions. What are the terms being used? And what happens when we take yoga just as a technique? Is it just a technique? And when we are taking it just as a technique, then these do's and don'ts, these prescriptions, yam and niyam, they are being forgotten. And abhyas is practice. And that's what I said, daily practice and vairagya, detachment, ignoring the excessive attachment, they are forgotten. So there are some issues involved in it. I'm not going much more in detail now, but I will try to bring this idea that how yoga is related to meditation, because from meditation is also part of mindfulness. And I will take some of these issues later on. And we know that William James already, one of the fathers of psychology, already in 1897, he talked about attention not being under control. And there is this ideomotor and willed action. And what happens here? That when we are talking of meditation, which is one of the later stages of yoga, then what we are doing in all sorts of meditation, the core issue is that you are deploying your attention, you are sort of controlling your attention. And this is why some of the cognitive psychologists have sort of come very close to meditation, but they cannot own these practices of meditation. But the whole issue about attention becomes very vital. And again, as I talked about this yoga being secular, we can talk of sacred meditation. And there can be sacred meditation where the whole objective is transcendence, about this spirituality. And then there's this secular meditation, which is applied meditation, we can see, which some of you must have tried. And with this issue comes, what has happened to these practices of meditation? This Westernization of meditation, it has also led to the secularization. And of course, you can say the other day I was looking at some church magazine in the inner city of Copenhagen, and there I saw a little advertisement about music meditation in Invo. It's one of the big churches in the city, Copenhagen city, and there they said that meditation is not only part of the Eastern religion, of Eastern faith like Buddhism and Hinduism. This practice of meditation and looking inwards has been part of many other faiths also. But I'm not questioning that. What I'm bringing out is these practices in the Eastern context where there is all this attention to the ethical and moral underpinnings. There are all these aspects related about ethic and moral and the broader society as well. So with this, I will like to see what is happening, because we talked about, as I mentioned before, I started talking about globalization. How is the time situation for me? Can you tell me?
Okay, you have 20 minutes.
So I should go a little faster, because let me tell you, it will be maybe good for you to hear. I'm not going to talk rest of the time. You are also going to see a little film. Isn't it exciting to know about the film? It's like you tell the children, if you work hard, you'll get a little prize in the end. But it won't be the end. It will be little later. So what I would like to share with you, that this movement of knowledge from one part of the world to another part is affecting also these practices in the country of origin. I'm a child of post-independence India. I'm born in 50s, and I must share with you my disappointment now. I never learned any yoga. I never learned these practices in my school time. The only thing we did was PT, physical training. That is what we got. This is part of our colonial legacy, that these practices were almost not there for ordinary people. Of course, there were some ashrams, there were some holy persons. So, but what is happening now with this movement of yoga coming to the West, is it not affecting people in India? It is affecting people in India a lot. And there's this movement across borders. So with this, now when I talk to Indians and I read about yoga practices, it's become so popular in India. It's just incredible to know that it is being practiced widely in many, many schools. Yoga once a week and an hour or two of yoga has become part of the curriculum for children. In residential areas, people are getting together and they are doing yoga in the mornings. And some of you must be familiar with these laughing clubs. Has anybody heard about? This is also one sort of practice when you get together. So these practices, so this movement across borders, this interplay has affected practices in India also. A lot of research is being done. And I think some of my students here, hello, have been there. And one of my students who's sitting here has written a wonderful project about mindfulness and overeating. And some of them have been to India for longer periods to learn yoga. So these exchanges are taking place, and also this technology is affecting their social, technologically mediate websites. Almost all these yoga ashrams and gurus have their own websites. They are blogging, they are on Facebook, they are in Twitter, and in this neoliberal context, many of these expert gurus are making use of these facilities which are available. And another, I don't know if those students are sitting here, it was very exciting for me to be supervisor for the group of students who have written this whole article about health perceptions where East meets West. Are you there? No. He promised to come, but he has not turned up. But anyway, it was a very exciting project written by the basic students about how these practices are presented in different parts of the world. It's the same ashram. Guru Ramdev, Patanjali ashram is one of the very well-known ashram for yoga in northern India. So the students analyze how the website of the same ashram, of the same yoga school is presented in India, in Britain, and in Denmark. And it is a good reading. They were basic students, but it shows that the same practice is being presented in different ways. And just one example I'll use to illustrate that in the Indian website, there was a lot of focus on the spiritual benefits of yoga, whereas on the Danish website, the focus was much on physical improvement and not having stress and being relaxed. So these differences are there. And these are all effects of globalization and modernization. There's this commercial. So yoga is also being commercialized. It's a big business. It's a $1 million business in the US, in many countries. So it's being commercialized, commodified. But is it simplification of yoga, or is it cultural hybridization? It depends on the optic you have. It can be positive or negative. So with this idea, we come to another practice which is getting a lot of popularity, and I will be giving some combined answers later to my own questions. We hear a lot this word mindfulness, and we wonder who brought this term mindfulness and what is the origin. And one of the reasons why I wrote this article was I was external examiner for the master's dissertation from Aarhus University 3-4 years back about these phenomena. And the way it was described, it seemed that one of the doctors, Kabat Singh, I'll be coming to his name later, he invented this practice. And that led me to explore the origins of this practice. And I could see that in Buddhism, the word smriti, which is Sanskrit word, or the Pali word sati, they are the chief factors in the Buddhistic meditation, because meditation has similarity irrespective of yoga, association with yoga or with Buddhism. And this mindfulness is regarded as having lucid awareness, very clear awareness and comprehension. And the term is not invented by an American in 70s. It was already Rhys Davids in 1881. He translated this practice of sati as mindfulness. So with this background knowledge, we can go a little bit more in details as mindfulness, it is transforming the sufferings through changes in what the mind is processing and how the mind is processing, and also view of what is being processed. So, mindfulness is a practice which is about the way of thinking, and this is a newer understanding. But we have to remember at the same time, when we are talking of these practices, it is embodied in a particular person. It's not just an abstract concept, it is being used by a particular person with a particular biography, particular life history, and it is also embedded in a particular context, cultural, historical, social context. So it's not just a simple uniform process being used in different settings. So with this, where is this practice coming from in Buddhism? And in Buddhism, we have these 4 noble truths about suffering. And you can see the similarity in yoga also. It was also about suffering and ending the suffering. And in this suffering, and there is also this craving, and how you can remove this craving. For this, would I get some more water? This is my suffering if I don't get if I don't get enough water when I'm talking. So now I'm getting help from my boss here, so that's nice. So the way to end suffering is through Buddha has given this path, this 8-fold path, and we can see the similarities. Thank you very much. We can see the similarities about this 8-fold path in yoga, and this Patanjali's 8-fold path and Buddha's 8-fold path, which again contains pragmatic ethic, it contains restraint, wisdom, ethical conduct, and concentration, and these are in much more detail. I won't go in so much details, but this right action and livelihood, they show that these paths involve ethical conduct, because for me, the main focus in this presentation is not about the practice as such, but about the part played by ethical and moral understandings here. And then we can see that the last 3 parts of this 8-fold path are about concentration, right effort, right mindfulness. And right is not right in the sense of being right or wrong, but in these complex translations of Buddhistic texts, we can see right is more about harmony and about interconnections. So these different factors or aspects, they are related to each other. And now we will look at, now there is some change. This is not the film. Film is still there, it will come later. But because of this idea about Kabat, sin, he invented mindfulness. This is what, so we have to see, no, it is not right. It is not 20 years back mindfulness came to the West. We can see the Buddhism's reception story. There are 4 overall phases. And some of my colleagues sitting here have a deep knowledge of philosophy. They know much better than I do about the first phase. Already in 1800s, you can see that Buddhism was a part, and I'm sorry I could not translate it. This is my colleague, psychologist Anas Thingman, who has made this beautiful representation of the 4 stages. And so the first stage is that how these philosophers were getting influenced by, and I can't even pronounce his name, Schopenhauer. Brian, can you help me in pronouncing his name? Arthur Schopenhauer. So, and Nietzsche, some of these philosophers were already influenced by Buddhism and these understandings in 1900s, 1800s. And then Carl Jung, and how you pronounce his name in English? Jung, in English also? So you call him Jung. Thank you. So this Carl Jung and Rudolf Steiner, we know about Steiner schools. They were also influenced by this thinking. And then later on in 1950s, we know about Alan Watts, and we know about Suzuki and this influence of Buddhism. So it has been there for a number of years, and now finally, in the last 2 decades, in 1990s, this influence of Buddhism as mindfulness. So Buddhism has been there, but this mindfulness practice finally came with the Kabat Sin, who is, by some young student, he is thought to be the inventor of mindfulness. You can see he comes rather late in the historical perspective and life, and now it is also in this cognitive psychological understandings. And a part of this is this little publication which I can show you here. So with this, we can see what is happening. Why am I talking so much about mindfulness and this little, I hope all of you can see this graph. It's very important here. 30 years back, although influence of Buddhism has been there for last centuries, number of centuries, but still this graph shows that there were hardly any publications. This is just an illustration showing that if you look at the year 1980, there were almost no academic scientific publications about mindfulness, and now in 2010, you can see the sharp increase in the publications within this area of mindfulness. And one illustration is Kabat-Zinn's development of mindfulness-based stress reduction treatment. And you can see at present, this practice is being used in many, many areas, not only in psychology, which is my major field, and also in health promotion, which is another subject I'm teaching here, but it's also in medicine, in therapy, in neuroscience, and now also in education, in law, in business, in organizational leadership, in many areas, these practices are being used. So what is happening to this practice? There is some sort of westernization and psychologization of these practices, and Kabat-Zinn maintains that this practice is universal and it can be used in a commonsensical way, but at the same time he says this dharma, the essence of Buddhist teaching should not be forgotten. He appeals to the mindfulness instructors, please don't forget the dharma, the teachings behind these practices, but still they are dangerous. They are dangerous. They are dangerous about reduction, about making it too simple on the exclusive. If you are only, and in some ways it has really become popular because it has become evidence-based. There's evidence, you can measure that the brain is developing and the body pulse is increasing. There are all sorts of physiological signs. It's fine to use them, but exclusively using neurophysiological evidence makes these practices very reductionistic. And also, if it is just a matter of gaining skill in a particular way, then you are overlooking these ethical aspects. So with this, I will request my colleague Malte to come and help me in showing you the film. Now the film is coming. Yes. And I hope, and because I must admit to you, I am from 50+ generation. I have not grown up with these computers, so I always feel very insecure when I have to show films in my teaching. So let's see how it functions today. Malte seems to be from the young generation. He was very confident it will work. And this film is not the ideal film, but it is just an illustration of how these practices are being used successfully in a Western context.
Say we're taking care of our troops. We placements. A little kid would have, before 20 months old, to have 4 different or 5 different placements with different families.
This is the most complicated organ in the universe. We've only taken the first very, very small baby step.
Do you want to stand in here and see how it feels in your belly? How does it feel in your belly? Good.
How can we help people to foster greater levels of well-being? We have been interested in using contemplative practices like meditation and yoga to help people transform their emotional lives, to help people cultivate resilience and respond better to adversity so that they can achieve higher levels of well-being in a way that is absolutely practical. They can take these methods and use them in their everyday lives.
My real hope is that the video or the effort that was done through the film is going to help generate awareness and give people another way to find help.
And that's where I think a medium like film really can create those discussions. Because I think the more people talk about it, I know in my case, the more I've talked about PTSD, the more comfortable I've been, not just with the subject matter, not just with myself going through it, but being around other people who are also, dealing with PTSD, with their own, traumatic stressors. I'm able to interact with other people who are suffering from the same things much easier because I'm talking about it.
Yes. So now you've seen this. This was just an illustration. I'm not an agent for the film, but I thought it was a good illustration of these practices for 2 war veterans who were suffering from these traumas from war, and this child, 6-year-old child, turning from this ADHD. Yes. And so with this, now I come to the last point about the new frontiers. What's happening to this exchange, this interplay of practices from one part, and we can see this mindfulness has traveled a lot from my country of origin, from India, over 2.5 millennium. We are not talking of short time, it's about 2,500 years to China, Japan, now it's in America and in Europe. And according to Bhikkhu Bodhi, an expert with a Buddhist background, he says it's good to use these practices. These secular practices are good because Buddha himself said upaya, they are skillful ways. You should use this knowledge, but at the same time, the danger should be avoided. It's important to avoid dangers of a reductionistic understanding. And how you can do it? It is by using correct mindfulness where other aspects are also remembered. It's not only about concentration, it's also about the ethical issues. It's also about compassion and act with prudence, act carefully with the compassion. And also, when the knowledge is coming from this well of wisdom from the eastern part of the world, these investigations should be done with humility and also with some gratitude, and not appropriation without acknowledgement where the knowledge is coming from. So with this I conclude, and my conclusion is that there is a need for more constructive interplay between Eastern and Western, avoiding uncritical and naive acceptance. And also, again, Steiner Quayle, I'm quoting, we have to go beyond this Judo-Christian individualistic stories of human beings. We have to include more integrative discourses like the Eastern discourses. And also, we have to promote this meeting of 2 different epistemologies in order to understand reality and elevate suffering. And of course, there should be quality control. Think if there was same sort of control, there was same sort of the rules and regulations about yoga and mindful practices as they are for the Western medical system, it will really help all the persons involved, more research transnationally across the national borders. And what are the perspectives from it? The perspectives are that we need this synthesis of science and spirituality, and psychology is a part of and influences the reality we study. So it's very important that we have these moral and ethical considerations. We cannot claim to have a morally neutral discipline, and then two-way, not only two-way but multiple exchange between East and West are needed to deepen this understanding of human existence. And the last is, you remember what I started with? East is East, West is West, and never the twain shall meet. Now this is the last slide. East and West must unite. They must unite to provide each other with what is lacking. So with this, I say this, Dhanyavad. This is my mother tongue, the country I am born, and this is my language, first language. And thank you, the language I am speaking in, and Thak, for the country I am living in, and for my colleagues who have been here. And if there is any need of contact, my email address is here. I think I managed the time.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.